Welcome to our plenary session titled Financing Green Enterprise. My name is David Yarnold, and I'm Executive Director of Environmental Defense Fund. I'd like to tell you a story. About 18 months ago, I was in a one-room farmhouse in Xinjiang province, the autonomous region in the far west of China. Many of you are familiar with, I'm sure. And Farmer Chang proudly turned on his two-burner methane stove. And he turned it off, and he turned it on, and he grinned at me. And he was a happy man because 1/5 of his annual income last year came from the first intra-China carbon sale because of the methane digester that he had in his backyard. Meeting China's rural poverty alleviation goals and helping to curb air pollution turned out to be money in the farmer's pocket. My organization, Environmental Defense Fund, was a partner of the Chinese government in that project. We work on climate and air, we work on oceans, we work on ecosystems, and we work on human health. We do this through cutting-edge science, through innovative economics, and through unlikely business partnerships with entities like GE, Walmart, FedEx, and many others. The format for this session will be short presentations by our two esteemed speakers, followed by questions from you. And we'll hand out microphones at the end of the session. As our title suggests, this session will discuss new financing mechanisms being developed to match innovative new green technologies. The panelists will share how we can help nurture green enterprise development in the public, private, and philanthropic sectors. Nachiket is the president of ICICI Foundation for Inclusive Growth. Mr. Moore has worked with ICICI since 1987 in a variety of roles, including corporate planning, project finance, treasury, and world banking, and was a member of its board from 2001 to 2007. He is a Yale World Fellow and has a PhD in economics from the University of Pennsylvania with a specialization in finance from the Wharton School. Christine Eibs is a co-founder of the and the executive vice president of E+Co. Ms. Eibs plays an integral role in successfully implementing E+Co's mission to create energy enterprises that alleviate poverty and protect the planet. Her responsibilities include partner and investor relations, fundraising, and strategic planning. There's more on their bios in your brochures. Let me set the stage, if I may. This is a timely topic. This couldn't be a more timely topic. The world is brimming with opportunities and with challenges, even in this city, even today. Now, it's important that those broad opportunities that we take advantage of those, that we demonstrate strategies that can demonstrate results, that we can build confidence on the part of investors and governments, and that we can rise to the economic challenges that we're facing. On the international front, we cannot separate climate change mitigation and the need for development. They are inseparable. There's a serious need to make sure that any global transition to a low-carbon economy addresses poverty alleviation goals and that investment occurs in building the capacity of countries to establish and implement modern environmental laws. We can't do one without the other. Cap-and-trade legislation under discussion here in D.C. in the House for the first time this week, and we hope in Copenhagen in December 2009, can launch unprecedented waves of investment in clean energy technology. And that investment can come from any number of sources. And last, the global recession has put an even greater premium on initiatives that engage the business sector in helping to develop solutions that produce great environmental outcomes and bottom-line efficiencies for the corporations that are leading the way. So with that, let me turn to Christine and ask you to offer your thoughts on where we are today on green financing.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here and share the model of E+Co and to tell some of the challenges about financing green energy enterprises on the ground in 22 countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. E+Co actually started as an example of a public-private model back in the early 90s when the concept of public-private and the concept of climate change was still a little risky to be talking about. And we actually began as a project of the Rockefeller Foundation. And my colleagues and I were asked the question, how do you take small amounts of public capital, which is how the Rockefeller Foundation viewed its resources in this particular question, and create envelopes of investment for the private sector that would deal with environmental problems in the developing world? And after a little bit of research and experimentation, which is what foundations can do so incredibly well, we settled in on the area of energy as the area or the sector within the environment that had the most significant potential impact, as science has since proven, on the environment, and also had the most impact on development. Energy is key to economic development, and with energy, anything is possible. Without energy, very little is possible. And if you do energy badly, the climate impact is quite significant, and we made the case that energy was key on environment and development, climate change, and poverty alleviation. We also made the case that access to capital for enterprises, for small businesses in the developing world, who would be the vehicles through which clean energy could be distributed throughout rural communities, urban areas, was missing. There was no capital that was necessary. The other element that we found was that there was a need to capacity build, to create entrepreneurs, to invest in business development services that would enable entrepreneurs to create and roll out businesses that would provide clean energy. So all of this was taking place in a spirit of experimentation, a spirit of innovation and risk-taking, which is what foundations and philanthropic capital can really support and does so very well. As E+Co rolled out as a nonprofit organization separate from the foundation, we really felt that we were taking the best of both worlds. We were taking what we knew of private sector investing, of making debt and equity investments in small businesses, and combining that with capacity building, things that the public sector often does quite well, government programs that do training and enterprise development. So we were taking traits of the public sector, traits of the private sector, and creating a third way of doing business. And we really see that E+Co is a very interesting model of public-private partnerships. A nonprofit ourselves, we're bringing in these different elements of activities, different forms of financing, and rolling out and providing services to green enterprises. We basically look at business development services as a public good. We're really looking at the capacity building of entrepreneurs and the provision of these resources to these entrepreneurs as something that's missing in the local marketplace today, and therefore the right way to be using public and charitable dollars to create the platform for investment to roll out the businesses. The model of E+Co, let me just take a pause here, and I've given you kind of the philosophy behind creating this model of public-private partnership in E+Co and the blending of public and private capital. Let me tell you what over the last 15 years it has actually produced. To date, with support from foundations such as the K.L. Felicitas Foundation, the Lemelson Foundation, the Citi Foundation, and others, support of the multilaterals, including the International Finance Corporation, governments such as USAID, the Swiss, the Dutch, the Norwegians, and with social and private investors, we've been able to put together a program that is invested in over 250 clean energy businesses in 22 countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. These 22 businesses, through our investment of about $32 million, we've mobilized over $180 million of other people's money, OPM, which is our favorite sort of local capital. That's come from a combination of local banks, local private investors, entrepreneurs, developers, local development institutions, other multilaterals, but we've leveraged $180 million of capital in small and growing clean energy businesses. Through June of last year, these businesses are bringing clean energy to 4.8 million people who did not have access to energy before. And this access is now clean energy for lighting, for cooking, for electricity. We've offset 4.6 million tons of carbon to date and are expected to offset more than 25 million tons over the life of these investments. We're actually also in a program of monetizing the carbon, similar to what David talked about in China, so that our entrepreneurs are able to bring carbon finance down to the poor, to actually bring carbon finance to the level of subsidizing a fuel-efficient cook stove in West Africa, in East Africa, or in South Asia. The challenge, though, that E+Co is facing and that others in this space are facing is that we've shown that we are a sustainable business model. We are a sustainable public-private partnership, an intermediary that, when all in, can return 3% on our capital. And we're very proud of the fact that we're a 3% business. The challenge is that that's pretty much in nowhere land. For those on the charitable side, many of them say, oh, our job is done, you're self-supporting, you're a 3% company, go off and do good, problem solved, we'll figure out the next issue. You go over to the private sector side and they say, 3%? Please, we're really looking for those double-digit returns of long ago, but we're certainly looking for more than a 3% return. So what's happening in this particular model of financing green enterprises is that we've proven there's a commercial opportunity on the ground in investing in different types of technologies, solar, waste-to-energy, fuel-efficient stoves, liquid petroleum gas to offset charcoal and firewood cooking. But we've also continued to demonstrate the need for the technical assistance and the capacity building that's necessary to create these enterprises as vehicles of sustainable and growing clean energy service delivery. And that very much is a quandary, I think, of public-private partnerships. When do you need to grow to be fully private and take the risk of losing that social innovation and diluting your mission versus should you just stay totally on the public or the philanthropic side? And what's the right balance? How do we fund this space in the middle? And let me stop there.
It's a pretty interesting notion, the downside of privatizing. We'll come back to that. Nachiket?
So I'm from ICICI Foundation. It's a new foundation. We started about a year ago, and environment is one of the areas in which we focus quite a bit. But as a bank before the foundation, the whole issue of financing green businesses has been something that we have engaged in for some time. You might have heard of the electric car Riva that comes out of Bangalore. It's a car that we were very early supporters of. The Green Business Council that is set up in Hyderabad, which does green business building ratings, the LEEDs rating, we were one of the early supporters of. We launched something called the Corporate Governance, Green Governance Award in India. What we began to discover, and perhaps should not have been a discovery, we should have anticipated, is that somehow from, and maybe this is not unique to India, but certainly the sense we got, was that the green agenda was seen somehow as a competitor to the development agenda. The sense was that we are a very poor country here, our consumption, or production of carbon dioxide is 0.5 ton, 1 ton, don't overdo this. This is interesting, but this is not the direction to go as a mainstream direction. And in searching, therefore, for answers, I mean, we do have a policy effort. When I began the foundation, I thought that if we wanted to pursue the notion of green business and think about green enterprises at the scale that India needs, we would have to take a different tack. And we didn't have to look far, because India, as you know, has several challenges. One, for example, the vast size of the country and the fact that we have 600,000 villages, and something of the order of 60 to 70% of our population resides in these villages, almost automatically makes it impossible for the grid to get to them. And it's not viable. Even if you use all of the financing that you can get, long-term development bank type financing, is just not viable to bring the grid there. And many low-income households actually live there. So without talking about it being green, the need for energy, which of course everybody will immediately recognize is something consistent with development, allows you to go in there and say, can we develop energy solutions for you that work for you to provide energy. That they happen to be green is a byproduct that we needn't spend too much time on, but it happens to be good for the environment and other things, but that's not the reason why we are talking to you about it. And what we also discovered is that while there is carbon credits available, there are carbon credits available, in terms of the price per unit of power that is available to the household, doesn't make that much of a difference. So while on a wholesale basis it could provide you some interesting additional cash if you can sell the carbon credits, on its own it wasn't the reason why you could go out there and build one of these enterprises. So the direction we've gone has been working with for-profit organizations, first to finish, and that will take us some time, but to do a reasonably good job of the financial access agenda. Make sure that a lot of homes have the financing that they need. And as I began to discover, often very good energy solutions run into trouble because the upfront cost is a little bit higher, and you get the benefit over the lifetime. So if you do not have good access to capital, good access to loans and debt, you're not able to make a lot of headway. And then start to think about what would we do with the actual products that are available to those households, and to try and understand if we can build a distribution capacity, which is what Christine was talking about earlier, to actually get the product out there to these households. So in a sense, our agenda in the retail energy piece is to actually go in that direction. We have a separate strategy on what we call wholesale energy solutions, and we do certainly some work on the policy side as well. The challenge that we have found on the retail side has been that despite the work of many, many pioneers, the actual channels for bringing the product out there do not exist. Or if they do, they have been sized to be too small to get to the level at which we need them to go. So we are right now spending a lot of our time thinking about what products and how they will be distributed. Because the benefits of a solar thermal cooker, for example, or a smokeless oven, they need to be explained a little bit. They're not immediately transparent. Why should a household change the way that they have been working for many, many years, generations even, for this product? It may be good for them, but it needs a certain conversation. We tried initially to do it through the grocer, the local, because this is a ubiquitous, universally present institution all over rural India. It was just not possible. You couldn't get the conversation going. We're right now swinging much more towards what some of the other pioneers have done, thinking about at least the wholesaler to kind of the semi-retailer being a dedicated energy specialist, and then using their outreach to go out there and build the whole distribution capability. The good thing is that finance is not our challenge. We can finance the whole supply chain, we can finance commercially, finance the household. None of that is actually a challenge. The real challenge is kind of making it happen. I think on the wholesale side, it's been much more of a struggle. We have financed biomass-based power plants in northern India, in the state of Bihar. The sense I have, and I'd be very happy to be informed otherwise, that there is a lot of work still to be done on technology. I think it's not a mature technology yet. What is happening is we have a little bit of a chicken and egg problem. Because power was not there, the demand for power didn't come up, right? The businesses didn't come up. The most you could see on the ground is need for lighting, need for cooking. The need for business power was not there because power was never made available. So now somebody goes out there, and sets up a power plant, a small one, 10, 11, 15 kVA power plant. There isn't enough demand. A plant load factor, which indicates utilization, that should go to 60, 70%, is at 15%. And at 15% plant load factor, you just cannot make it viable. The price of energy goes to a point where you're talking about 50 cents a unit to $1 a unit. Now, you can't run a business, at $1 a unit of power. That's just not a viable idea. And clearly, grids, then they run into the same problem that I mentioned earlier. We have to think about how do you store energy, how do you distribute energy from these power plants, and maybe how do you miniaturize, how do you make them even smaller so that you can add modular power plant capability. And these are challenges that we are grappling with right now. One of the challenges in India, you might not imagine it so, given the agricultural nature of the country, in biomass-based power plants has been biomass availability, because it is seen to be competing with fodder for cattle. And there is some anxiety that by switching biomass for energy, you will actually be depriving cattle and poor people with access to some fairly inexpensive sources of revenue. So some states have put limits on how much biomass can be used for power generation. And clearly, that's been a bit of a bottleneck as well to try and figure out what is the growth forward. My sense, though, is we have to find an answer to that, because without that, small enterprises cannot come up. And small enterprises, in my view, are and you've heard this in other conversations yesterday and today, are really important to a significant poverty alleviation kind of drive. So without wholesale sources of power, I think we have an incomplete journey. The retail stuff is good. Certainly the light at home allows businesses to do, local restaurants to do interesting things. Children can study longer. Lots of, we have a large study going on in Odisha, jointly with MIT, on the health impact of removing smoke from the home. And my understanding is WHO says, bad food or not enough food, bad water, and bad environmental smoke are the top three, drivers of ill health in India. So clearly, it can have many, many good impacts. But from a growth and development perspective, unless we figure out this wholesale power, I think we will have a bit of a challenge. On the policy side, as I said earlier, the dialogue has been, nobody will say it. You go to the government, you go to anybody, and you ask them, is this your position? I couldn't point you to a speech in which anybody said that to me. I'm just giving you a sense of the way you pick up the nuance that, we are a poor country, we need to grow. That's our priority number one, priority number two, priority number three, and we don't have a fourth one. Right? So really, in that context, does environmental debate, have room at all? And what we have tried to do in our policy work, we work with a team in Chennai called the Environmentally Sustainable Finance Group, is to try and understand, can we reposition the debate a little bit? For example, all of the banks in India, including mine, have not signed the Equator Principles in India, and the thought has been, why doesn't India evolve its own principles? Why don't we think about, because somehow the sense that these are other people's problems that we are being asked to be responsible about, has started to pervade a little bit. If we want to change the debate to, well, forget the world. Let's think about India for the Indians, and let's think about, is there a way we can reposition the debate within the country, and think about a cap and trade system, for example, for India, amongst Indian businesses, not so much India and Kyoto Protocol. And we're making some, I would say, somewhat slow progress in that direction. We launched a website last year in which, using publicly available data, this team, they ranked Indian state governments or Indian states on 6 parameters of environmental performance. and gave everybody a rank, and then we called the governments that did the best to receive an award, and of course they were very pleased to receive one. So we got very good attendance and very good media attention from this. The whole idea was not so much to say that you're not doing well, or that you have to be held accountable. It was more to try and reposition the debate to say, within India, there are state governments that have done a great job. How can we learn from them? States that are identical states of development. Why is somebody got a score that's so high? Why has somebody got a score that is so low? Eventually, we hope that we can start to think about kind of domestic carbon trading, something that allows us to think about a carbon set of issues, carbon issues within the country. What are some of the struggles we are facing with? And these are perhaps ideas that you may already have figured out. I would love to know more about them, or if you have not, maybe these are ideas that you might wish to spend some time thinking about. One is, it's been very challenging for us to find the right answers. You might imagine that to find the right solar lantern should be trivial, but it isn't. There are many people working in this area, and everybody claims theirs is the latest, the best, the cheapest, the strongest technology. For a banker like me and my colleagues who are mainly financiers, where do you go to say, somebody looked at these things, is there a user feedback? Is there a, Expedia hotel type rating that tells me in this environment that works best, in that environment that's not a good choice? It's been very, very hard. I launched, out of some sense of frustration, a Facebook group called Rural Innovations. And I discovered I'm the only Rural Innovations Facebook group. Imagine that, in this wide set of people that do these things, to try and get people to post ideas on rural innovations and comment on it and talk about it. Unfortunately, Facebook is not quite designed for something like this, so you can't actually search inside those ideas now. So you have to go sequentially, one by one, and not everybody has the patience to do that. So that's certainly one area that's been a challenge for us, and this has been true on the wholesale side as well as on the retail side. We are struggling to find solutions for salt pan workers. They are using 45 million liters of diesel every year to pump brine out of salt pans. Very poor quality diesel. You would imagine that there was a solution right there. We've been looking for 3 years. We have not found a good solution. We've recently got into a relationship with the World Resources Institute, and requested them to search the world to try and find, the ideas, where do they work well, where do they not, and to try and figure out what the right answer is. The second issue has been, and which is, somehow the industry has polarized or got segmented into, I'm the solar guy, I'm the wind guy, I'm the biomass guy, I do something else. The reality on the ground, though, is that you have some grid, you have some wind, you have some solar capability, and some biomass. So a banker like me goes to the ground and says, well, how do I know what is the right combination here? And unfortunately, the integrators, the solution providers, have not emerged. There isn't somebody you can turn to and say, don't sell me your product. That's not what I'm interested in. What I want right now is a design of a solution that works for me, and tell me why this is the good idea for me, rather than, I've got this great solar lantern, why don't you sell that lantern for me? Because I'm not convinced. And we have resisted this notion of, why don't you bundle the financing product with the lantern? Because we don't know if the right answer for the household is to buy an LED lamp that they can link up to their grid power. Maybe that's a better answer. But because I'm giving him a loan to buy a solar lantern, he's actually buying something inferior, because I'm not giving him a loan to buy the LED lamp. What we have done is we said, well, the lending to you is much more the financial access agenda. So we have a partner that focuses on financial access. We'll try to figure out how much loan you can afford to take and service properly. Then you decide what product you want to buy. Do you want to buy this lamp? Do you want to improve the efficiency with which you consume biomass? That might be a better idea for you. Rather than switching completely to solar thermal cooking, one woman, for example, in one of the villages told us, one of the products we retail now is a Shell Foundation product called Enviro, Fit. It takes 10 minutes to heat up. She said, my husband, he comes for 15 minutes to have his lunch. 10 minutes is too long. I can't wait that long. So it's not a product that works for me. Now, I don't know, is it indeed entirely the story or what else is going on, but it's possible that the products didn't quite fit. So that's been the other kind of challenge in this, and I'm sure, you know, in this very vibrant industry here in the US, there are people that are working on these issues, but, you know, making sure that the search costs go down, help people find the right solutions fairly quickly with an honest, straightforward feedback, rating, ranking system, I think would help a great deal, certainly would help us a lot. We're spending a lot of money trying to rediscover, the same old issues that I'm sure many people around the table know very well. And the other issue is to try and put together hybrid solutions where, you know, I think I heard you say this on the video, dark green to light green or light green to dark green, right? Which is, you know, the right answer may not be zero emission, at least right now. It may be that you go from, you know, a lot to something much less by burning fuel, the same old fuel, but much more efficiently, at least to begin with. And again, you need somebody that's willing to be a bit more kind of creative and kind of pragmatic to try and find these solutions.
Well, Nachiket, thank you. That's a terrific window into India and where it is in terms of energy development. Christine, you want to talk about the light green to dark green philosophy? Yeah.
Our focus is on the environmentally superior energy solutions. So we often talk about bringing people and households and communities up the modern energy ladder. It would be great if everything was renewable. It would be great if it came in clean, shiny, solar-powered cookers or solar generation, but that's not necessarily the most appropriate, the most available, or the most affordable technology for the communities within which we're working. So when we first went to Africa back in 1998, we thought solar was it. We're going to invest in solar businesses, we're going to invest in different countries, in rural energy service companies that only provide solar. And we very quickly learned the lesson that that was not the most appropriate or the most affordable technology for the needs of many of the communities we were working in. And our entrepreneurs are actually the ones who brought that lesson to us. We came from the US on the backs of experience in India and also down in Latin America, thinking we had the answer, and our entrepreneurs proved us wrong, which is really a good lesson. So we began looking and listening to what the entrepreneurs were saying, and we started getting into things like fuel-efficient cook stoves, which the Shell Foundation is also very much engaged with. We started looking at, okay, let's look what's working here. Let's figure out with our entrepreneurs how we manufacture them so that they're more cost effective. And let's also look at liquid petroleum gas. It's not a renewable fuel, but by introducing someone to LPG as a source of cooking, we're moving them off of firewood and charcoal. And therefore, it's actually a much more environmentally superior choice. Just one comment, I have many comments, but one comment in particular that I want to mention is back in 1995, which is so many years ago, but we started wrestling with this issue of what's the channel of distribution of energy goods and services and what's the channel of finance. So it's the channel of distribution of goods and services and the channel of distribution of finance. And it still today is very much the challenge that we're facing in disseminating these technologies into rural areas. And the financing of these two issues are really at one of the key barriers we have to solve to increase penetration of clean energy.
Why is it still the problem?
I would say it's two reasons. The first is just the overall amount of capital that's going into the space. The second is entrepreneurs, getting the entrepreneurs ready and willing to go. And on the distribution of credit part, and you're starting to see more of it, is really getting consumer credit in place. For a long period of time, microfinance was not really looking at this area of consumer credit, of providing capital for the purchase of a solar home system or a cook stove or something. You're beginning to see some differences in that area where microfinance institutions are now looking at really, can we lend for energy goods? So you're starting to see the change. And it's really just a question, and this is a word that was used in the previous panel, it's a question of scale. I mean, I think the fact that we've invested in 250 businesses and there's others out there who have invested in energy businesses, we're just at the beginning. There needs to be more E+Cos. There needs to be more locally based investors who are willing to work with entrepreneurs. And that's how you're going to create these channels to the point where you're bringing, I think the numbers now are there 2.4 billion people who are still cooking with traditional fuels and 1.6 billion who are without electricity. And by 2030, after we spend $30 trillion, those numbers basically remain unchanged, which is a very scary thought.
So I would like to ask each of you a question or two more, but I'd like to ask you all to ask your questions. So please raise your hands and we'll come to you in just 1 second. Nachiket, you've talked some about the right to credit. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I mean, it's not a, for the microfinance industry, this is, of course, old news. The notion is that, every individual household should have, full access to finance. And our view, see, when we started up my foundation for inclusive growth, somewhat of a pompous phrase, we discovered quickly we didn't know how to get that done. But we could say with some certainty that an inclusively grown country would have full access to finance as an important element of what you would see in that country. So what we are doing, working with a for-profit partner to set up community banks that basically are branch-based. There is a lot of technology, but it sits behind. You don't see it. We use fingerprint-based authentication. It's completely paperless.
Right.
It takes us 30 seconds to process the transaction. Lots of machines, but they're all kind of hidden to give full access to communities. So that's the notion. Go to a village. How can 85% of that village be fully taken care of in terms of financial services?
And do you feel, I realize that that notion is not cutting edge, but do you feel like it has taken root?
I think there is a big journey ahead. I would argue to you lots of interesting things have happened. Certainly the fact that Professor Yunus received the Nobel Prize, the microfinance industry really pushed out,
right,
has made a big move there. But it's still an industry that needs a lot of evolution. The notion we have is much more closer to older banking or older financial services. Not so much the modern view of microfinance, but much more full-service finance. Right, insurance, savings, bankers sitting with you, looking you in the eye, you being available on a continuous basis. Our branches are open from 8 in the morning to 8 at night. Some will open at 4 in the morning because the fish catch comes in at that point. So it's somewhat more traditional, and somehow a blend of these two is what we are hoping to get.
Terrific. Christine, you talked some about the box that E+Co is in, not enough profit for private and enough profit to supposedly be on your own. To what extent is patient capital the answer?
Oh, I think it's very much an answer. Often investors, private sector investors, or even foundations, when they're thinking more about a program-related investment or a mission-related investment, they think about it as a project having a beginning and an end. The reality is we're talking about creating businesses. We're talking about creating enterprises. And the lifespan of creating an enterprise is much longer than a 3 to 4 year period of time. It's not where a project ends, you write a report, and we're done. It's really thinking about how can the capital go out and be used in a way that's going to leverage other capital, mobilize other capital, and create sustainability on the ground. So I think patient capital is key, and I just would like to give an example that Fabio Rosso gave yesterday in the session on climate change, which I think just talks so eloquently about the role of patient capital in energy, which is we're all very comfortable in this world of finance saying we're going to finance a biomass power project or, goodness gracious, a nuclear power plant for 20 years. We're going to put 20-year financing in, and everyone can sit back and say, that's exactly the right thing to do. But we're going to expect a rural household in Nicaragua or in Cambodia or in India to pay $500 for their power system today. It's like going to and buying a hairdryer and saying, before you buy this hairdryer, you're going to buy your electricity. You're going to pay for it all up front. You're going to pay for every kilowatt hour that you're going to use when you purchase it. There's a significant inequity in how we think about bringing electricity services and energy services to the underserved in our markets. And as I listened to Fabio yesterday, I said that's exactly the right example. Why are we expecting our rural customers, our poor middle class customers in these markets to pay for their energy services up front when it's fine for us to finance over a 10, 15, 20-year period more traditional forms of energy?
That's a great point. Let's go to your questions.
Hi, I'm Lisa Kleisner with the KL Felicitas Foundation, and this question is for Christine. I'm curious what the characteristics are of small alternative energy companies that you're making investments in, and what you look for and what you see as sustainable. And particularly, if you could speak to it from a global perspective, maybe some trends you're seeing out in the different 22 countries that you're working in.
What we look for most, and wouldn't be surprising to anyone who's working with small and growing businesses, is we actually do look to the characteristics and the caliber of the entrepreneur. If you cut across the 22 markets that we're in, we're really saying, does this man or this woman have a commitment and a passion to their particular idea? So I would say that is clearly the most critical first factor. And then what is the idea? Are we talking about a technology that has some validity in the market that they're in? And what is the ability of either the utility, if it's a small-scale hydroelectric facility, or the household, if it's a rural decentralized energy company? I think in terms of the trends that we're seeing, there's clearly, after a first generation or a first phase of rural distributed generation, decentralized generation, we're looking to see what, beyond the first cash customer basis, what is the potential for credit? What are the linkages with local financial institutions, whether they be rural agricultural banks or microfinance institutions? So part of the trend in decentralized, locally based distributed energy is what is the financial institution presence within the market, so that once you've got a certain fixed cost basis in your company in a urban or peri-urban area, what's the ability to penetrate further, if you will, into the bottom of the pyramid? So what are the trends of the microfinance or the local lending institutions? And that's also where we're starting to see, quite honestly, some impact from the current economic situation. Many of our businesses do sell on a cash basis, and there has been a decline in remittances going into many of these markets. And one of the first places that hits is in the ability of customers to buy solar home systems on a cash basis, or to buy fuel-efficient cook stoves or small solar lanterns. On the other side, on the more small power plants, like a small-scale biomass facility or a small-scale industrial waste-to-energy, what we're seeing is some of the local credit drying up. So the trend that we're seeing there is, how do we bring in other types of co-investors? Our goal has always been to engage local financial institutions, because we see that as a way to get financing these enterprises as a business-as-usual activity. We've proven that these types of businesses are viable. Let's get the local financial institutions engaged. We're just beginning to get some traction. I could honestly say, as we were moving into 2008, that slowed down a bit. So that's a trend that we're seeing. To come back to what we really look for in an enterprise, it's, does the technology make sense? And what is the capability and the passion and the drive of the entrepreneur? These are not generally high-margin businesses. These are businesses that entrepreneurs are getting in because they can create a sufficient enough income to send their children to school, to have a more comfortable lifestyle. But many of them are really driven by the fact that they're bringing clean energy services to the communities, to the households, most often where they've also grown up and have some dedicated commitment to from a family perspective. So it's a low-margin business with enough to give them a comfortable lifestyle, but they're really driven by the passion of making a difference in their community. They really are social entrepreneurs in and of themselves.
I find it encouraging that the single most important criteria in looking for entrepreneurs in developing countries is the same as here. It's human capital.
Yeah.
Right? Questions?
Richenda Van Leeuwen from the Good Energies Foundation. I'm interested in both of your perspectives, speaking to a lot of people in this room who have come from a standpoint of helping to mainstream microcredit, microfinance. You mentioned, Christine, specifically that we've seen some advances in trying to mainstream financing by microfinance institutions, specifically for renewable energy, specifically for lighting, and reaching to the bottom of the pyramid on energy access. I'm just interested on how you would speak to donors in the room today, perhaps who have been part of the whole movement to bring microcredit to the mainstream, of what their access points as philanthropists can be in this sector specifically to help further that in terms of mainstreaming the renewable energy and clean energy aspects of microfinance to help drive the growth of the sector.
Great question. Thank you, Rachenda. I would say that, coming back to David's point, patient capital is key. If you look at the evolution of the microfinance sector and you look at the amount of grant funds and innovation funds that were invested in that sector, I think that the space that we're in now in terms of creating clean energy businesses definitely needs the same type of innovative capital, patient capital, grant-based capital to enable the businesses to grow. I think there also needs to be an understanding that while there's investments that are made and that are profitable, I mean, on the E+Co basis, our portfolio after a loss reserve is about an 8.5% to 9% return on investment, which is impressive. And yet, when you add the costs of the services to create that human capital, that's when we get down to that 3% to 4% range. So I think the concept that there is a need for some subsidized capital which preserves principle is an important idea for philanthropists to think about. There clearly is a role in patience and investment that it will enable the space to grow to the point where 15 years from now, we should be rivaling where the microfinance sector is today. A couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of speaking at a Net Impact conference when it was the year of microfinance. And I said to them, 10 years from now, a decade from now, we should be talking about the year of the small and growing business. And I think we can take a lot of lessons learned from the types of capital that went in to grow microfinance, to grow this space. And we can also realize that there's this benefit of linking the two spaces together, that microfinance can be a very important vehicle through which energy services are distributed, allowing the small and growing businesses to reach an even better level of growth, profitability, and penetration.
I'd like to get other questions. Nachiket, if I understood you correctly, it sounded like you were saying that the missing link right now is at the wholesale level, that it's the business people who can be on-the-ground distributors, who can be integrators, who can be the kinds of sources of information, who can understand that those are businesses worth growing as well, in addition to the retail or the financing side. Is that something that seed money, that banks can help create?
Well, coming from a finance background, certainly from our perspective, money is not the barrier. The real challenge, even in this question on microfinance, the way I see it is the microfinance industry has gotten very good at a certain product design, and they've done really well on that. 5-member groups and group guarantees, a maximum of $500 per individual. The average loan size about 200. So it's become a very efficient industry at that. Energy products, or more generally enterprise financing, needs much more flexible design, much more mainstream banking type structure, and that needs new skills and new technology. And it might also require the microfinancier to curtail their regional growth ambitions. They might have to concentrate more on a specific region to try and build depth of penetration rather than breadth of access. So it's a difficult choice, but my sense is if microfinance is going to become an important partner in the energy business, I think that and those donors, those sponsors that are working with microfinance institutions might want to engage them in those conversations. On the wholesale side, I think the tipping point is not there yet. If you were to ask me, are there no distributors in India? Well, there are. You know, Unilever is one of the largest distribution setups in the country. You go to a remote rural location, you will find, you know, Lifebuoy, right. You know, or a Wipro bulb will all be there. They have not yet seen that this business, because this business is a specialized business, requires a certain style of selling that is a little bit more challenging. The direction we feel might be useful, because a small new businessman, distributor now, might feel that the risk is too much. I don't want to get into it right now. What if this stuff doesn't sell? Is to try some, you know, kind of Islamic finance model, in which, I mean, Islamic finance I understand as balance sheet equity, in which you're not waiting for listing to get money back, but you're taking it directly from the balance sheet as a revenue share or as a profit share. Maybe that will encourage risk-taking a little bit more. There is need for partnership that we are forming with, you know, investee companies of E+Co in India to try and, you know, kind of train these people, because it needs some work. So that's at least the way I see it, more of the challenge. Not as much, because unlike the rest of the world, India is flush with money. There is enormous liquidity in the system. And banks are risk-averse, but eager to lend. It's a matter of, you know, finding the right kind of opportunity, because while the sentiment has definitely invaded the country, the reality of India is there has been no subprime default, mortgages are holding steady, right. Even credit cards are doing reasonably well. So it's not, you know, so I, you know, in short, I don't think money is the specific challenge.
Great. Questions? I want to introduce a new variant of this conversation, and it's not so much about microfinance as it is about policy finance. And my organization is working with small island developing states to help them envision and create the models that would allow them to join a global climate change network. What kinds of agreements do they need in order for them to be able to carry on those twin goals of development and reducing environmental hazards? Another area where finance is critical would be working with rainforest nations. I'm sure that you all know that that after the U.S. and China, the two largest producers of greenhouse gases are Indonesia and Brazil. That you literally cannot make the math work, and I wish I had Tom Seibel's terrific slide to show you that curve again. But you cannot bring those numbers down without the rainforest nations reducing their deforestation. And to be able to come up with a regime for them that they own and that they create is the trick that somehow we need to pull off between now and December. Which will be a pretty neat trick. I have a question for the panel that I know is often on the minds of this group. I had the pleasure of being at the first, this is my Jane Wales story, I had the pleasure of sitting at Jane's table at the first two global philanthropy forums at Stanford. One of the things that you always ask is this kind of investment only for the mega foundations? What level of investment actually can make a difference in terms of bringing about the kinds of changes that we're talking about?
All donations gratefully accepted. The reality is we're a portfolio company. We've invested in some larger, if you would, waste-to-energy facilities in Asia, in Thailand, that return 24% on equity. That enables us to invest in the small businesses that are, you know, returning 8%, 7% on equity. So when you think about E+Co that way, my reaction when I speak to a potential investor, we have a lot of capital that we've raised from the faith-based community. And they come in at $10,000 or $25,000 debt. E+Co borrows some of its capital. And I've had conversations with some of the sisters, and they've said, well, how do I know this is making a difference when you're bringing in $3 million or you've got an $18 million facility with the International Finance Corporation? And my comment is, it makes a significant difference to the entrepreneur in Nicaragua who's actually going to be utilizing your capital. So as a blended value organization that's bringing together public capital and private capital, the sizes of those capital coming all together, as long as the reporting is reasonable, works for us. And the reality is, as the capital goes down into our entrepreneurs, we do make investments as small as $20,000 in a solar cooker company in Bolivia, or in a small waste-to-energy, rural energy enterprise in Cambodia. We also make million-dollar investments. So the capital blends together and enables us to do what we do. So my feeling is I'll talk with most anyone as long as their reporting requirements aren't so onerous to make the investment unaffordable from the intermediary perspective. And of course, we actually enter into loan agreements and investment agreements with our entrepreneurs that are subject to local law. So we treat them as true, we really have a true investment relationship with those entrepreneurs. And part of the reason is, in my closing, is we're trying to get these green enterprises to be business as usual customers for traditional financial institutions. The reason the Rockefeller Foundation embraced this in 1992 was because they wanted to change the clean energy finance paradigm. That's really what this is all about. And the paradigm is shifting, but it hasn't changed yet.
So my perspective is really there are two dimensions of this, and in both, I think small-sized investments can play a role. One is this whole patience dimension. There is certainly, as I said earlier, need for new technologies. And it's not always obvious to me that the mega million-dollar investments, because they are risk-averse, they take a long time to get going. Many interesting skunk work ideas are out there that need small amounts of support to get to the next level. For example, when Sesame Street came to India, just to give you another different example, they needed a zero-level grant so that they could make a proposal to USAID for the level 1 grant. It was a small amount of money that they needed, which we were able to give them, that allowed them to go to USAID with a much better prepared grant. That's often something that a small player can do that a big player can't. But the second idea, which I'm entirely with Christine, this notion that when a technology is reasonably well known, we do drinking water, commercial drinking water financing. One of our for-profit partners does that. Each water purification plant, there's a company based right here in the US called Water Health International that has a subsidiary in India called Water Health India. They do this work. Each plant is, $30,000, $40,000. It's not, several $1 million. And that plant supplies clean drinking water at 10 cents a day for the whole family, home delivered, to 10,000 people. We have done 440 of these plants. We ourselves have done 220. Others have come up with the rest of the money. We are serving over 1 million people right now. And the belief is it could go nationwide. Once again, something that a mid-sized donor could say, this sounds good. This is an established technology. It changes lives of people. You can see direct impact on diarrhea. You can see weight gain, and it's certainly quite transformative. So again, a role for small investors stroke donors.
So my answer would be that because we take no money from our corporate partners, that a relatively small amount of money can produce transformational change. Putting 2 people in Bentonville, Arkansas, to be arrayed against Walmart's $1.8 million was not terrifically expensive, but allowed us to take part in to help Walmart realize $350 million in energy savings, to sell $100 million, 100 million fluorescent light bulbs, and to produce a program in China that will reduce as much in terms of water and air pollution as the government is capable of doing in 5 years in a much shorter period of time. So in talking about this panel in advance, one of the things we heard was that very often there is this impression that really large philanthropic gifts are what's required to make a difference, but you can change the life of a village or, for a very reasonable investment. I'd like to thank Nachiket Moore and Christine Eibs. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank Jane Wales and the Global Philanthropy Forum for this track. To know that it's at your soul and your heart is really quite meaningful and speaks louder than any words could. Thank you. Who wants to stay here?